Skrink. I saw Blue Beetle, directed by Angel Manuel Soto, and if you asked me what I expected from this film going into it, I'd have told you it looked like it might be neat, but that I am seated purely out of an arbitrary sense of obligation. I see the cape shit movies, so I'll see this one, and I don't expect to be impressed. But I could not have possibly been prepared to enjoy it as much as I did. Yeah, this is one of the really good ones. Not one of the I had fun ones. Not one of the I see what they were going for, I can respect it ones. One of the good ones. Starting the film out, it may not appear that way. There's a sort of vintage vibe to it, but not in the way where you definitely mean that as a compliment. There's this 80s movie air about it, but maybe like an 80s movie nobody still talks about in the 20s. Earlier on, some of the characters fail to be as endearing as the movie seems like it wants them to be at this point, and it starts to feel like it's taking a while to trudge through some of that first act sludge and get to the Beatle-y stuff. There's also an inexpensive vibe to the film. Even if you didn't already know it was supposed to get dumped on HBO Max at some point, you could potentially feel that just watching the movie play out. Budgeted around $104 million, this is one of the cheapest studio superhero movies of the past few years. But while at first that might seem like its greatest weakness, I'd argue that is its greatest strength. I imagine at some point in your life you've heard some spin on the phrase limitation breeds innovation. Studio filmmaking has kind of gotten away from that. They'll just throw a blanket $250 million at these things nowadays. Enter Blue Beetle, a movie given roughly half that amount, and its FX-heavy sequences manage to look about on par or maybe better than a lot of other big movies that came out this year. Curious. I'm not certain about this, but it's possible that you also need someone in the director's chair with a clear vision who will have a good idea where to put that money before the cameras roll. It's possible. There's only one CGI heavy scene where things start to look a little iffy, and even that looks a good deal better than when The Flash did something vaguely similar, so you really can't blame me for being skeptical going in. A movie I knew was once destined for a streaming service with themes of family and a villain who seemed to just be a guy with the same power set as the hero. Hero, but bad and red. At least he's not gray. And while Blue Beetle certainly never aims to reinvent the wheel, all of the traditional elements are done so well it can feel like the first superhero movie you've ever watched. The villains, Susan Sarandon's snide business Karen Victoria Cord and Raul Trujillo's gruff but tortured Carapax, two characters that a superhero movie with a shakier foundation might be tempted to mold into one character and do a thing where they have a sympathetic backstory but also must be slaughtered to maintain a status quo regardless. I really enjoyed both of them. Business Karen's motivations are the perfect amount of uncomplicated. I think there's supposed to be a bit of implied spite towards her brother Ted in there that ties into the family theme, but for the most part, she just wants to make the fattest coin in a way that hurts the most people possible, specifically the kinds of people she looks down on. I hope this doesn't come out weird, but I thought it was really interesting how racist she was. She never comes right out and says, I want to kill brown people. But, she wants to kill brown people. The movie makes that pretty clear. She barely registers them as human, and the one she treats with the closest thing to any amount of respect, Carapax, is in an injured puppy kind of way that she's quote-unquote fixing. Carapax, the villain Jaime actually gets to fight, because why would a stodgy old business person want to be the one to actually use the death suit? Also seems pretty surface level at first. Same shit you've seen a million times. Same powers, but ideological opposite, you know how it goes. Just, with way more interesting one-on-one beatdown action scenes with raw dialogue that really hammers in and sells the way to that ideological difference and orbits the theme in a really cool way. But other than that, kind of same old most of the time. But then the movie hits you with a surprise emotional core that expounds on that theme of family way more than I ever expected this film to. as well as touching on some incredibly dark and serious subject matter that it presents in a really interesting non-chronological way that hit me like a truck. It might be a point of criticism for some how close to the end of the movie they choose to reveal all this stuff, but I think making the move to reveal that stuff about Carapax to the audience and to Jaime that late in the game makes the most sense for Jaime's journey as a character and an evolving early superhero. It hits us when it hits him, and that helps to show what's going on in his head at that moment. Honestly, just a slam dunk third act all around, which, funnily enough, is when a lot of people say most recent superhero movies fall apart. I feel like I hear a lot of, yeah, they had some good stuff going, but the big CGI slop climax kind of brought it down. Not here, baby. Not in Palmera, not my cape shit. Much higher degree of restraint here, higher ratio of practical effects and set work than these movies have become used to as well. Zola Mardueña does a pretty good job, in my opinion, as the Blue Beetle Jaime Reyes. The story throws a pretty turbulent gauntlet of emotions at his character, and he goes through them in about as believable a fashion as you can in a movie like this. Jaime's family, again, I wasn't so hot on to start with, particularly George Lopez's conspiracy theorist inventor uncle and Belissa Escobedo as his super negative sister, but now being privy to the entire film, part of me wonders if that's kinda supposed to be the point. Like, yeah, as an outsider looking in on this family for the first time, I'm not going to immediately fall in love with their eccentricities and their shtick. When they really start to endear themselves to you and tug on your heartstrings is when the rising action ramps up and you see how they band together to help each other in times of immense strife. One point of criticism I'd have with that, though, is there are a few scenes where Lopez kind of has to turn off the funny for a moment and get a bit real, and I thought that was interesting, and I wish they had leaned into that a bit more. The least interesting thing about this film has probably got to be the whole Ted Cord subplot. I get why all of that stuff is in there, showing the disparity between Jaime and Jenny's families and reconciling Blue Beetle's complicated comic history, but it just feels haphazardly shoehorned into the story. Don't hate it. Don't love it either, but I don't hate it. It's also pretty safe to say this film's plot sometimes leans into some current events, is what I'll say without getting too into depth. I wouldn't want to spoil too much. The film's characters and plot weave this subject matter through the story, though, in a pretty organic way where it doesn't just jump out and pause the story to do a brief PSA. However, I don't want to imply with this point that subtlety is always king. It's on a situational basis. I can respect when a work of media has a bold point to make and the balls to scream it from a rooftop. That'll always beat having absolutely nothing to say. But this balanced approach also works, and definitely works here. Man, this has been a surprisingly solid year of superhero films. Sucks it's also the year they died. Yeah, people are not seeing these movies like they used to, particularly the DC ones. I hope director Soto gets more work in this genre regardless of Blue Beetle's performance. Let heart beat numbers just this once. In a genre of blockbuster film that so weirdly is dominated by directors who don't seem to know how to put together a good superhero movie, let this guy back in the door. He clearly knows what's up. He's got the recipe down, so let him cook. It's still BERT. If this was at all interesting, maybe hit that thumb button, but not the one that points downward, or I will beam faces of great terror into your bedroom. I am also on other social media platforms. Do with that what you will.
That man's a fascist.